Without further delay, I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker today. Steve Cabano is the president of Pathfinder. He is a dear friend of CII. He's got a rich history of volunteering with CII, whether on research or in leadership roles. He is the recipient of our Richard Tucker Award. And with that, I'm happy to hand it over to him for his presentation today. Thank you, Steve.
Great. No, thanks, Jenny. So the program is a kind of a two-part presentation, and I'll try to explain why here, right? So, one of the things that we'll do in the introduction is kind of give you an understanding of, why we thought this was important, and to cover all of the different components. It looked like it was roughly going to take 2 hours. So instead of doing a 2 hour, one event type thing, we decided to split it up into the 2 days. So hopefully, either between attendance or the recording, you'll get the full gamut of the effort here. All right. So from an introduction standpoint, so why this program? Through Pathfinder's experience in CII and then in what we do on a day-to-day basis, individuals kind of have commented that, with over 1,000 different, documents and research efforts and so on that CII has, is there a way to kind of summarize that into just a handful of things that would add the most value, right? And add the most value today. So, in a short phrase, what's the biggest bang for the buck from a standpoint of, not having to kind of sift through all 1,000 documents, but just trying to get through something that can really add, from an owner standpoint, value today. So why now, right? So, one of the things that we're seeing is, the industry has definitely gone through a reshuffling of resources. Whether it's within the organization that you work for, that some people have moved roles, or actually shifting organizations, either from owner to contractor or different owner to owners and things like that. There's a number of new CII members as well, right? And one of the other things that we've noticed is the projects they're not getting any smaller, right? If anything, they're getting larger. A little more complex due to regulatory requirements and resource limitations, supply chain issues, and so on. And there's a substantial capital program bow wave that we see either that we're in right now or forthcoming. So why us? Why Steve Cabano and chatting with you? So Jenny mentioned that we've been a member of CII for a number of years. I couldn't remember exactly how many, but I know it's over 20 years because we were involved in the 90s with CII and even before that. One of the other things is that we are a registered education provider or a registered provider within CII. So we are integrated in kind of the tools, the processes and so on within CII. And we actually do facilitate. I was just talking to Jenny that we've been asked by another number of organizations to facilitate a number of these efforts. So it gives us some experience on the ins and outs of the tools and so on. The other aspect is myself and some of you may have heard Jimmy Cravens just say that he's on the line, have participated in a number of these research efforts. So not only are we kind of the facilitating side of it, but we also kind of understand how the tool was created and what the purpose of it is by actually participating in the development effort. So what do you expect here within roughly the 2 hours that we'll have over the next 2 days? Obviously, we can't give you kind of a detailed explanation of each of these tools, but what we hope to do is give you a brief overview of a handful of the tools that you can organize in a way that puts together an assurance program from an owner standpoint that kind of demonstrates from the early concept of an opportunity all the way through commissioning and startup, how you can kind of have that, whether you call it a phase gate assurance process or just an assurance process, that would add value to your overall capital portfolio. The other thing that we wanted to do is also say, these are things that you could implement today, right? I mean, it's not something that you have to, hire a consultant and spend a lot of money in customizing and so on. No, right? People pull these tools off the shelf and can start the implementation process, within weeks, and not have to go through a whole, development effort and so on. And they can be done internally, right? You don't have to go to an outside facilitator. Some people do, but these are some things that you can actually implement internal. So it's pretty cost effective if implemented, effectively. So a little bit about myself. What I tried to do here was to just list some of those CII things that Jenny was talking about. So you can see that through the early 2000s, involved in a lot of the different committees, been a board member for those 20 plus years, but also have kind of helped in some of the direction of CII and so on. So pretty familiar with CII. Jimmy's been involved. Jimmy Cravens has been involved for a number of years as well. And Paul Williams within the Pathfinder organization is now, I think he's the chair of the deployment committee and facilitates some of the sessions that some of you have actually probably participated in the board of advisor meetings and things like that. Okay, so what are we talking about here from a project assurance standpoint, right? So what we were trying to do is to, if you remember some of the reasoning that, people are sometimes confused on, how do I take the most value out of CII without having to go through those 1,000+ documents and so on? What are the things that kind of can add value right away? So there are a proven set of CII tools and research that have been used, for a number of organizations now for a good period of time. Some are a little newer than others, but so kind of getting those into the right structure can add enormous value. Now, there's also one of the tools that we'll talk about is one that's going to be deployed at the annual conference this year, right? But that kind of looks at more the front end type of thing. So I'll give you a little overview of that. But we were trying to come up with this, what can owner organizations today implement that doesn't need a lot of customization, doesn't need a lot of time? If I wanted to implement something within a month or two from this end-to-end kind of a assurance approach, that you could do that. And that's basically what the effort here is all about. The idea is that, these are not how you do a specific phase, but more of an assurance, more of an overview type of aspect, so that, the owner organization can have an assurance group, set of people maybe, that can make sure that things are happening in that organized, sequential type of an approach, and really looking at kind of that business planning, right, where I don't even have a project yet. I really have opportunities all the way through kind of business realization, right, so that you're actually gaining value out of the assets and the capital that you spend. And the idea here is that we know that every owner organization that we work with, every owner organization that we know about, typically has more opportunities than they do have capital. So, how do you get the most value out of those selection of different opportunities, so that you gain that business value? And business value is the ultimate business objectives are changing in the organizations today. It's not just based on financial returns anymore, right? It's the whole ESG, right? So how do we make sure that we're doing the right thing for the environment, right? So you get the low carbon opportunities, the circular economy. You've got the social things. You want to do the right thing for people, and then you've got governance, right? So what are the regulatory requirements that are changing, and so on and so forth. So what we were trying to do again was to make sure that there was a handful of tools that can kind of help in guiding owner organizations across the process. So we base this off of a typical, 5-phase process. You see this in a lot of the CII documents, where feasibility is really the idea generation. Concept is coming up with the best overall solution. Detailed scope is refining that to get full project authorization, which is that gate 3. And then you get your detailed design, procurement, construction in that 4th phase, and then the 5th phase is the handing it off to operations. So we said, okay, what are some of the the tools out there? Well, the first one is this capital efficiency and capital effectiveness. That's a tool that hasn't been launched yet. I'm sitting on that research team, so I'm going to give you a teaser in this session about what's that all about. What's forthcoming that will add value, and how projects get into the pipeline. How do they feed that phase 1, and then how do you mature that into a capital portfolio that adds the most value to your organization as an owner. We'll talk a little bit about the project definition rating index suite of tools. I guess there's probably 8 or 9 different variations of the PDRI now. And we'll talk about kind of the main one, and then how you kind of adopt the different versions of that as part of that assurance in the phases that are pre-authorization, right? So kind of that middle of phase 2 to the end of phase 3. How do we apply the PDRI in the most effective means? Then we'll have the construction readiness assessment, right? This is, again, are we ready to go to the field? Just because our schedule says, okay, mobilize, should we be mobilizing? Should we be actually executing the or mobilizing our resources? And that may start all the way up in the middle of our phase 3, to kind of say, okay, here's the things that we need to make sure that before we mobilize, we got to be in place. And then your ultimate construction readiness assessment would be done right before you mobilize. But if you only did that one, then you may not have enough time to kind of correct some of the things that might be some deficiencies. Project health indicator, right? So in support of things like project control, what's a different lens that we can look through to make sure that our projects are on track or heading in the right direction. And again, some people think that maybe you can only use that in execution. Well, no, not really. I mean, you can start to assign that or utilize that as early as kind of the middle of phase 3, and then obviously all the way through construction. And then you've got your planning for commissioning and startup, right? That yeah, it's kind of the back end of the process from an assurance standpoint. But a lot of those things need to be evaluated through these phases to make sure that you're ready for commissioning and startup. Now, you might say, well, where's advanced work packaging, right? That's kind of the big thrust within CII today. Well, one of the things that we analyzed is people are still assessing how to implement AWP. So we didn't want to give something that would still take a lot of time to try to mold and figure out how you're going to utilize the AWP processes and so on. So that's kind of an overriding approach here, right? So if you go backwards and you start with commissioning and startup, and then you go into construction with the commissioning and startup plan, to your path of construction, to your procurement activities that have to support the path of construction, which would align with things like your project definition rating index, all the way back through the engineering end of things to get your engineering work packages. You can overlay AWP across this. And if it's appropriate, if people accept the kind of this assurance approach, well, we can come and actually do a kind of a third module of this on AWP and how AWP ties to all of this. So that's kind of the 5 assurance tools and research efforts that we're going to apply here. I'm going to touch on 2 of them in this session, and then the other 3 tomorrow at the second session. So the first one, as I mentioned, is something that is actually being finalized right now. So it's the first, pursuing the capital efficiency or capital efficiency and effectiveness. And big part of this that we had to do, and I'm not going to read all the details here, but was and I sit on this research team. I wish I could participate more than I have, but was really defining what those two terms mean, right? So efficiency and effectiveness, right? So the efficiency side, if you remember the previous research effort, and I forget the number, that fed this, we had to basically figure this diagram out, right? That capital efficiency is, how well you do your project, and can you squeeze out the value of the capital that you're spending within that given opportunity, that given project. And the more efficiently you can do that, the more value you would gain from a business standpoint. But that's kind of only half the formula here. The other half is the capital effectiveness, right? Are we executing the right project, right? Did we analyze the opportunities well enough to say, yeah, these are the group of opportunities that would add the most value to our organization. Now, I mentioned before, value is measured in a different set of parameters these days, right? So it's not just economic return, it's not things like net present value and rate of return and all that kind of stuff, right? If you think about the message that's been sent across most of owner organizations today, right? It's more about the ESG, right? Somebody would, the marketplace is willing to spend more on a recycled plastic bottle than they would a plastic bottle that is produced from direct hydrocarbons, right? So how do we support that world, right? That world of the ESG kind of vision. So what defines success from a capital effectiveness standpoint may be a different set of parameters. So that's the arrow down, is kind of the business saying, here's what's important to us. The project teams have to basically say, okay, here's the kind of things that we can do to support that. And then if those projects kind of get matured and authorized, then we want to do it as efficiently as possible. So as I said, one of the first things that we had to do in this 394 was to create these definitions of capital efficiency and effectiveness, and then put a framework together on how owners kind of assess that portfolio of options. If I do have more options out there, or more opportunities than I have capital, I can't go and execute everything, right? So I've got to figure out what are the, what's the best combination that is going to support our business objectives, but also, we got to stay in business and make money, right? So there is the revenue side and the income side that also adds value. And then how do we make sure that our contractors and suppliers are integrated into this as well, so that it's an overall kind of a look at efficiency and effectiveness that supports both ends of the equation, right? The group did not want to just say, okay, owners, pick the best projects, and the contractors are left outside of that. No, we want to integrate them into the overall solution. So you'll notice here, and again, I don't want to ruin any of the surprise of when this is rolled out at the annual conference. But you'll notice that this is this whole portfolio management envelope, right? And how kind of the corporate inputs on the left-hand side kind of feed the portfolio process that pushes out opportunities and projects out the right-hand side, right? So you go from at the bottom there, you see the business team, kind of that integration and alignment to hand it off to a project team that goes and actually hopefully executes on the efficiency side of things, right? So again, a lot more detail coming in the annual conference, but the idea here, and here's, if you're interested in learning more about this, we are going to be presenting at the annual conference. That QR code will send you right to the registration page. But that's where we'll actually, give you some more of the details of what this tool kind of looks like. But the intent again is really, and I'll just summarize it here in a few things, is making sure that from an owner standpoint, we are selecting the right opportunities, and right needs to be defined, right? And it's not a global, okay, yeah, the ones that provide the best economic return. No, not necessarily, right? Different organizations may have different opportunities or different business drivers. So that's what the second bullet there is all about, right? Is making sure that now we have projects that support this, and those projects need to be aligned with the business expectations, right? There's a big push in the industry today to do much more alignment between the business and engineering, right? We get involved in a lot of those facilitated workshops, and it's amazing what comes out of it, right? The aha moment that I'm not willing to spend from a business standpoint money on future expansion because we're only going to look at this for the next 5 years, right? And we're not going to expand it in the future, or the other way around. This might be a pilot type project, and I don't need it to be really robust. I need it to provide information on this project because I do plan on building a whole brand new mega project in the future. So that engineering kind of alignment, so that we don't overspend or over design projects that are going to support the overall business approach, right? So ultimately, the last bullet there is this is the first pre-step, right? This is even before you get into FEL1, that we're weeding out those opportunities that they sound good, but they're just not aligned with kind of the business approach. And then once you get that, get through that first, that weeding out process, then you start to follow the typical kind of front end loading activity. So as I said, I'll just go back a slide here. More on this to come, right? And I think you'll see that there's a direct correlation to kind of feed the pipeline of opportunities, which I know is an area of not struggle but concern. Are we, feeding our capital program with the best opportunities, right? So this isn't selecting the best project. It's really selecting the best opportunity that at the end of the day, this is going to provide this type of value to the organization. Then we'll follow our typical front end loading process on saying, okay, what's the project that's going to be implemented to support that overall opportunity? All right. So we're going to hold questions till the end. I know we said open discussion here, but just from a convenience standpoint, we'll hold it till the end of the session here. And there'll be 10, 15 minutes to be able to do that. So you can either feed the questions into the system now, or we can, but I'll field them later on. All right, so that's kind of the first assurance review, would be kind of feeding the pipeline, right? The second assurance tool that's out there is one that's been around for a number of years, right? It's the Project Definition Rating Index, and it's series of, whether you want to call them sister or related PDRI efforts, right? So you had, the original PDRI was a PDRI for industrial, and then there was one for buildings and infrastructure. Then there were small versions of that. Then there was a PDRI-X for the manufacturing and life sciences. There's a PDRI for mining, and so on. So there's a number of variations of the PDRI. But for those of you who are not as familiar with the PDRI, it can be utilized in a number of different steps, right? So obviously you have to choose a concept first. So you're somewhere in the middle of phase 2 when you choose a solution, a concept of how you're going to move your project forward. So a lot of times there's a PDRI that can be done at the end of phase 2 to give you kind of an assurance assessment. Are we at the right level of detail to go into the detailed scope phase? Then there's usually one that's in the middle of phase 3, right, which would be the detailed scope effort. And then there's one that's usually done at the end of phase 3 for full project authorization. Right? Your score.
Just a minute.
So, excuse me. I guess if everybody can put themselves on mute, appreciate it. And then you have the PDRI at the end of phase 3 that would help in understanding whether you're ready to move into the next phase. And one of the things that we keep reiterating in a lot of our CII training and other things as well. If you're on an owner project team, your job is not to push the project through the gates, right? It's not a beauty contest, right? It's not something where you have to try to make your project look as good as it can to get authorization, right? No, right? It's really, what is the realistic expectations for a scope of work to solve a problem? And what does it cost? How long is it going to take? What kind of resources do you need, and so on? And the gates are there to make a decision on whether that project, still makes sense to move forward or not. So it ties back to the capital efficiency and capital effectiveness, right? If the opportunity looked good in the early phases, but then as you mature it, it starts to not look as good anymore, then stopping a project early is a good thing from an owner standpoint. It allows us to go back and say, okay, out of that portfolio of opportunities, was there another one that that could add the value now that we know more about the one that we were doing work on? May not meet the business expectations. Let's go back and take a look at what other opportunities we have. Right, so we got to get that mindset, and what the PDRI allows us to do is if we utilize it correctly, is to have an unbiased viewpoint on the level of definition that project has gone through, right? So the level of maturity of the deliverables, but then also on the newer version of the PDRI matters, we also can check things like the inputs on accuracy. So again, if you aren't familiar with the PDRI, it's been around for a while, so there's some metrics, and there's some substantial cost savings, right? Again, if cost is one of your main drivers, of projects that are less mature or less accurate to the ones that are more mature and more accurate. And that there's, you can, whether it's 20, 25%, somewhere in that range, it's big money no matter what. Doesn't mean that necessarily a project, is still good to go through the gate. It just means you're going to have better, more realistic information if you follow the process correctly, right? So the way this was done is there were a number of studies done over the years about, what are the key inputs or outputs from a maturity standpoint. And for industrial projects, these were the top 9. Right? You got to know the products, you got to know the capacities, the technology you choose, and you can go down the line here. Right? So these were the key things that had to be solidified as you mature your way through the process. And there's a series of questions. I'll give you an example of a couple of those in a moment that allow you to measure whether you're ready or you've done enough work to get a good assessment of whether that project makes sense or not. What this team also did, this was the maturity and accuracy team, was to take a look at accuracy elements. So very hard to measure accuracy unless you redo the engineering, and we didn't want to do that, right? So we had to measure inputs to accuracy. So what this does is it says, okay, are you setting up an environment that people can be successful, right? They can produce accurate, outputs, from the environment that you set up. So you can see these are the top 5 kind of accuracy elements that, does your team have the right skill sets, right? Or did we just throw a bunch of people together to kind of, address the deliverables? Does leadership, right, have the experience in planning design, right? Similar size scope. So have we done projects like this in the past? And does leadership understand the importance of things like your front end execution and that kind of thing? Stakeholder management, right? There have been a number of studies out there on the importance of stakeholder management and stakeholder input as early as possible. The 4th one there, contractor or engineer's team experience with the location, right? And then the last one is the commitment of the people, right? In other words, keeping a solidified team, not keep changing out resources. These are just the top 5. There's 27 elements that make up the accuracy scorecard. And the way this works is, as this used to be I'll call it the older maturity kind of assessment, where for each element on the left-hand side, and there's 72 of these, right, of items that you're going to be assessing, right? They were measured from a 0 to a 5, and all of the criteria was the same for every element, right? It was 0 means it's not applicable. It's the score is less is better, right? So 1 means you're completely done. 5 means you haven't started yet. And then there was a gradient in between on the 2s, 3s, and 4s. It worked pretty well, right? But it still left room for interpretation of what was 2, 3, and 4 on a given element. Then on the accuracy side, same type of thing, right? You got a high performing to not acceptable, and the range is in between. So when you look at the scorecard for the maturity side of things, right? And I know it's probably hard to read and so on, but you've got it broken up into kind of what your the basis of your project is. Do you know your reliability philosophy? Do you know the maintenance philosophy? Those types of things. Then you get into more of the business objectives, right? What are the products? What's the strategy? Why are we doing this project? Are those things well known? And again, you can go down, and the next group is more on the basis of design. So this is more of the technical side of things. And then you've got your execution, right? So schedule and execution plan and so on. And there's that scoring system in the middle. But one of the things that the teams recognized is, that the 0, 1, and 5 were easy. 0 is not applicable for my project, right? 1 means I've got it completely done. 5 means I haven't started. But the differences in what a measurement of a 2, 3, and 4 was challenging, right? And by the way, each one of these ratings is weighted, and it's weighted based on statistics. So how much more important was one element than another, and a lot of that came out of the research effort. So the elements are on the left. The assessment, your score, is in the middle, and then there's a calculation of the score times what it was weighted, and it gives you kind of an overall summary. Now, and how you facilitate this, a lot of people hide the weightings so it doesn't bias people on, oh, I got to rate that one better, and so on and so forth. You want a totally unbiased view of where that project stands, and it's not just a, I talk to people and I accept what they say. I have to dive into the details and say, okay, is that maintenance philosophy well documented, well communicated? And you can see in this particular case, they're saying it's a 3. So it's kind of in the middle of the road. It's not, 100%, to where it should be. The difference in what the PDRI matters is versus the old PDRIs is now there was much more definition put into each of the elements, right? The question. So you see here, this is plot plan. And the plot plan, so it's really, okay, there's a definition on the left-hand side, but now the gradient between 1 and 4 is defined specifically for the plot plan. It's not, partially complete, halfway complete, majority complete, and incomplete. It is specifics around the plot plan. So you think that there's 72 questions, and there's roughly, there's 5, potential scores, but 1 is complete and 5 hasn't started. So there's a lot of detail that goes into every one of them, because every one of those definitions is now different of what's a 2, a 3, a 4 within each category. So that was the big change in the PDRI recently. It was these scores. Now also on the bottom, you notice in the blue or gray area, that also talks about renovation or revamp type projects, right? So the top is more greenfield or more your traditional type projects. The bottom is the same type of criteria, but now how would that be interpreted or applied for a renovation or a revamp type of project? The tool is very simple to use. It's based on Excel, but you can actually go in and score it right here. You see at the bottom where it says 1. You hit the arrow up, arrow down, and that would give you a higher score or lower score. Or you can actually go into the spreadsheet and do it that way. On the other side of the equation, on the accuracy side, again, the research indicated that there were 4 main areas that needed to be the environment needed to be addressed to assure that a good set of conditions exists for the team to be accurate. And that accurate being they have the right information, they have the right budget, they're allowed enough time, all these kind of considerations. So they were bucketed into 4 main categories. There's 27 overall questions, and it functions similar to the maturity, where you have on the left-hand side, what is the definition? And then on the right-hand side, what kind of condition exists? Now, it's really interesting when you do the accuracy part, right? If you do it too late, you don't have time to address any of the issues. So just doing the PDRI matters at authorization at the end of FEL3, prove that, okay, yeah, I got a maturity score, and whether that's good or bad, might help in my approval or non-approval of the project. But if my accuracy score wasn't good, I didn't have time to adjust accordingly to make it better, right? So the accuracy part we're finding is better applied early, right? Maybe at the end of phase 2, beginning of phase 3, to make sure that these conditions exist in a positive manner. In other words, you get a good score, lower the score to the left. So that team is provided an environment in feed that allows them to be as efficient and as possible, right? Because then obviously you're not going through a bunch of rework and things like that. So that's why you saw kind of mid phase 2, end of phase, mid to late phase 2, mid phase 3, and then the end of phase 3 might be the stopping point for the PDRI matters. So it allows time for you to adjust if in those early PDRIs if needed, right? So again, part of that assurance effort is the recognition of those conditions and then an adjustment accordingly if needed. You'll see tomorrow the same type of thing will exist in the construction readiness to make sure that you've got all the right deliverables, excuse me, for construction. So at the end of the day, when you facilitate one of these PDRI matters, your project's plotted. It's plotted against a excuse me, the maturity axis on the left-hand side. On the x-axis, you have accuracy, and you've got 4 quadrants, right? You've got all the way. The top right is high maturity, high accuracy. And the bottom left is low maturity, low accuracy, right? It's coming from the feedback that you're getting from analyzing, the project at that point in time, that snapshot in time. So you see that your project or your assessment, is plotted on this chart. And then there are metrics that basically support it. That says, okay, in this case, we're going to rely, because we've got high accuracy. That means we've got a pretty good set of inputs or conditions to get good information, and our maturity is right on the borderline of high, medium, low. So it's kind of in that. So we probably need to work a little bit more on the the level of content, the level of definition within each of the deliverables, and then the PDRI maturity score can be plotted to show where some of the bigger gaps might be, right? So it's a little bit of a kind of a risk assessment as well. But the overall, what we saw is it's not just the score, right? It's the continuum, right? So yes, the score is going to give you an assessment that's probably not going to be all that great if you use it in phase 2, right? But it's going to identify gaps. In the middle of phase 3, the score should get better, but it's going to identify the remaining gaps. And then hopefully by the time you get it to the end of phase 3, you've closed most of those gaps, and you're ready for a good quality assessment of whether that project makes sense or not at the end of phase 3. So that's kind of the relative timing, right? You're kind of staging it correctly. It can be gamed, right? I mean, the tool is meant to be a constructive assessment and not something that you want to game the system, right? By saying, yeah, I know I don't have that done, but I'm going to give you a better score anyway. No, right? It should be a realistic, take it seriously, that if something's not where it should be, that it is identified as a gap. It's one of the reasons to have an independent team kind of look at this, right? Because sometimes our project teams get blinders on, and they may think that they're more mature than they really are from a deliverable standpoint. And an outside resource, not necessarily a consultant or anything like that, but somebody that's just not involved in the team, might have a different perspective of that. And then, the last part of this is, that there is huge value in the scoring aspect, but that's not, the ultimate goal here, right? It's really the recognition. We call this an assurance process. It's really the recognition that there may be some gaps, and whether the score shows it or not, just that going through the PDRI tool, all these tools, opens up some awareness that there are some things that we may need to close, so some gaps or risks that we may need to address a little bit further as we march down the process. Okay. And just the metrics, these were projects that were plotted using the PDRI matters and where they were at project authorization versus where their end results came out. So the ones that were in the bottom left-hand corner or quadrant, low maturity, low accuracy, tended to be over budget, right? So 22% over budget. The ones that were up in this high maturity, low accuracy, right? So this was, based on more people's experience than it was providing them the right inputs. People figured out if you had good experience and you had good knowledge and so on, I'll figure out how to make that project, to get the deliverables to where they need to be. So, that improved from 22% over budget to 6% over budget. But if you could drive it to that high, right, the high maturity, high accuracy, you tended to see things coming in even under budget, at budget or under budget. So that's where that 24%, if you look at the delta between the 22% in the low versus the 2% below budget and the high, that's where the 24% opportunity comes from, right? So, what's the value proposition for the PDRI matters, and all the other, PDRIs that are out there? So it's to make a good decision at the gate, right? This is to reinforce that we're not trying to push projects through the gate. We're trying to make a realistic assessment. If we really want to address the best opportunities for your organization to spend its capital, where is that best place? We got to respect the gates and what they're there for. And if you go through a PDRI assessment and you get a good score and the numbers don't support the business case, then that project should be, either recycled or canceled, and go and kind of address other potentially other opportunities. Provide an assessment at those gates that provides the decision makers a good idea of whether it's even mature enough or accurate enough to really do the assessment. And then the kind of this measurement allows us to kind of see, are we doing the right things at the right time, and so on. All right. So those are the two tools that I wanted to review today. There are only two of the five, and we'll address the other three tomorrow. So we're not done. I do want to end the session with any open items, questions you might have, and that I can potentially field. So Jenny, how do we do that?
Yep, I will go ahead and read the questions. So the one that I have here is, this came on early in the presentation.
Okay.
It says, who is, quote, we, when it comes to bringing business outcomes and project outputs aligned to our strategic management? So I think you might have referred to a we. So the question is, who is we when it comes to bringing business outcomes and project outputs aligned to our strategic management?
Okay, yeah, so I can interpret that two ways, right? Is the we the research team, or is the we on the actual opportunity? The research team, again, it's just like any other CII research team. It was a combination of owners, contractors. It's like a third, right? Third owners, third contractors, third consultants, and education providers, and so on. And they're the ones that did the research. I think the question is more about who's the we when we're looking at kind of the business opportunity. It really is ultimately, an owner is not, and I don't take this wrong, but the owner is not in the business to build projects, right? They're in the business to usually sell a product, whatever that is, and their value proposition is if they can produce that product as efficiently as possible, and increase their margins on what they can sell that product to the consumer. That's the ultimate goal, right? We happen to need projects to build these assets, to produce the products, to sell to our clients. So the we was more around the business folks, right? How do we better align what their interests are with engineering? Because if you let engineering solve problems, we typically get the best engineering solution or engineered solution. Sometimes that doesn't align with the business folks, right? They're not willing to pay extra money for, extra throughput capacity or feedstock differences or those types of things, right? So what that we is all about in that early capital efficiency and capital effectiveness effort is the combination of the business people meeting with the more of the technical people, and make sure that we're aligned in the guardrails that we're going to give engineering to stay within, right? And if we can do that, hopefully we don't have a lot of claims for things like gold plating and things like that later on, because we'll have a better alignment with what the business expectations are. So hopefully that addresses what that question was all about.
Thank you, Steve. So I do have another question. What about qualitative focus assurance? How to simplify, I guess.
Not sure. That came in early too? So more about the.
Nope. That just came through.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure exactly how to answer the question, to be honest with you.
The second half just says how to simplify this. So I guess, is there a way to simplify the qualitative focus assurance?
Well, I mean, the tools themselves, I mean, I'll use the PDRI because it's much more established than the other tool that I mentioned today so far. It's a very simple tool. I mean, on a project by project basis, to do a PDRI assessment, on a smaller project might take a half a day, right? On a larger project, it might take a day. So, but the value is going through and honestly addressing those questions. So it's a pretty simple overall assessment. Now you got to be honest, right? And might have to look at the details around a specific element to make sure that it is a difference between a 2 and a 4 kind of thing. But from an assurance standpoint, that's what it's all about, right? Is to make sure that the level of completeness, the level of maturity is where you want it to be to make a good quality decision. So I think it has to be done anyway, or should be done anyway. And the tool just gives you kind of a framework to work within. Not sure I answered that question.
You did. He followed up with the clarification of how to simplify PDRI. So yes, you did. Okay. So the next question is, how is PDRI different from design assurance tools like DDQA and CDDC?
Okay, not sure about the alphabet soup there, but so you do your normal design reviews, right? And yes, right, you're challenging the level of completeness and kind of the interface between the different disciplines and so on. And those continue to go on, right? The PDRI is really there to kind of look at it from a holistic view and I'll call it more of a project management kind of thing, right? So there's the middle section of the PDRI is on the design basis, right? So that is going to be kind of similar to, how well you've done your, your process engineering, right? At some point, you need to have, process flow diagrams done. At some point, you need to have P&IDs done. And where you are in that process, and that's what you'd find in the level of detail for each of the grades, 2, 3, 4 kind of thing, would be in that process engineer question, right? So you're just saying, okay, I'm at this point in my process design. I'm at this point in my mechanical design and so on. So that's going to be very similar to, your assessment of where you might be on a technical design basis. But the other things that it also looks at, right? The first section is all about the business, right? Did we have that alignment between our business people and engineering? Or is engineering just making certain assumptions and going forth? And if that's the case, then a lot of times we miss each other, right? We either over design or under design, and all that does is start churn later on. The third section of the PDRI focuses on more of that project execution planning, your schedule, things like that. Do you have a good control system defined, and so on? Those are, again, you're not going to find that in a design review, but you will kind of draw those things out in the PDRI, which are as important. Now, the weightings are different, right, and what's important. And actually, if you look under the hood a bit of the PDRI, a majority of your weighting is in that first section. About half your points are in that first section. So you got to get that business alignment correct, because you could design the best solution, but if that first part isn't correct, then your best solution for something that's not aligned with the business is not going to be a really effective utilization of your capital. So it looks at a lot more things than just the design side of things, the whole PDRI.
Okay. So I have another long question. So can PDRI be utilized in the context of program management, i.e., multiple concurrent projects with interacting elements, for example, a 500,000-mile bullet train project?
So I'm going to answer that in a couple of ways. So the first one I would say is yes, right? So if you can break a project down, let's say you got an overall program like the bullet train, which would probably have, hundreds of different major pieces of work, right? So you kind of take a look at the work breakdown structure, and you say, I might have the rail system, I might have the cars, I might have, the different aspects of the work that would constitute the overall opportunity. Every one of those is a different kind of project within a program or a project within a portfolio, right? So each one can go through your PDRI assessment as an individual project that fits within a program. There was a second part to that talked about, I think, the interaction of, kind of the status of one part of that, the way I interpreted it, the status of one project in that portfolio related to the status of another project. The PDRI itself does not address that, right? So you'd have to say that, okay, for this overall program to be effective, here's the sequence of the way all these different work breakdown elements have to occur. And then that would align to when each one of those should be more mature from a standpoint of an assurance review to support the phased approach of doing that program. So, yes, I think the PDRI can add a ton of value. Typically, if you have a mega project, you don't do one PDRI. You break it down into still large projects, but projects within, usually as a process area. For us, it's usually industrial projects. You might have 2 or 3 process areas and then utilities and offsites, and you may assess each one of those independently for a multi-billion-dollar type of venture. And I would sense it would be the same thing for kind of the rail project.
Thank you. Okay. Have there been any studies done to collate project performance, business outcomes for projects that have used all the tools across the phases, and if there are any correlations between the scores produced by the various tools?
Great question. I think the answer is no, but I think there's a research study that is either ongoing or coming up here of kind of looking at just that, right? So if you take a subset of the 1,000 things that are out there, and you focus on, so what we're talking about here is assurance, right? So this is kind of a kind of the cold eyes review of these 5 tools and how they would add value. You can coordinate or put the other sets of CII tools to address other aspects of the work, right? So you could just focus on safety and say, okay, there's whatever it is, 3 to 5 different major tools that we can focus on making sure that we've got inherently safer designs all the way through, effective handover and operations in a safe manner. So has that been done yet? No, right? I don't think so. Maybe there's somebody online here that knows more about that than I do, but I know that there were some discussions about looking at packaging a lot of these tools up for different focuses. Again, this one being kind of assurance. And then using the metrics aspect to say, okay, if you get certain scores along the way, what are the end results? And then we can correlate that. And I don't think that that's been done yet.
Okay. I did have just a couple of questions for folks asking for the recording and the slide presentation. And yes, we will certainly send that to anyone who needs it or anyone who missed the webinar today. I do have one final question. We've got about 2 minutes left. I have seen owner organizations use the PDRI to validate moving through the stage gate process, i.e. need to score at least an 85% to move out of FEL 3. Can you comment?
Yeah, I mean, the scoring, like I said before, the scoring is important, right? I mean, it gives some kind of a metric to focus on and so on. We've seen it a lot. A lot of this depends on the culture of your organization, right? We've seen where you do have some kind of a metric, right? Like IPA has their front-end loading index, and a lot of people would say you have to have a front-end loading score between this and this to get authorization. There are organizations that have done that with the PDRI, right? The score, a certain range, is kind of I'll call it the best in class if you want, target. If your culture accepts that, yeah, but if you're outside that range, be honest. And if you're outside that range, we'll have a discussion, and we may ask you to go back and do some rework or so on. If the culture is, you know what, I got one shot at this, I'm gonna do this PDRI myself. And we had actually an individual that had a very bad project that was in the steel industry. And we went back and we looked at the PDRI, and the PDRI was best in class, right? It was, you're targeting for a 200, and it was below the 200 by a substantial amount. And we asked the individual, why, how did that happen? He said, well, I was going to the phase gate the next day. I sat at my desk and I answered the questions the best I could. So that's not the correct behavior, right? We really want to try to get an honest opinion and make sure that the score turns out to be whatever the score is. But there are a lot of organizations that will say that score has to be within a certain range for us to say yes, we authorize it. But the score is just the score, right? The project still needs to be evaluated based on its cost, its schedule, and a lot of other parameters to see if it's still valid. It's just the PDRI tends to be one element of that decision gate. And again, if it's not within that range, you may be asked to go back and do additional work.
Fair enough. Thank you, Steve. All right, everybody. Thank you for your time today. We look forward to seeing you all same place, same time.
Hopefully we see everybody tomorrow.
Enjoy. Right. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Have a great, safe afternoon.